Getting around in Latin America can look like this, making it really hard to do business. The region's main trade partners are the US and China, with China compensating for a big underspend in transport infrastructure.
China invests more in Latin America infrastructure than the combined amount of development makes.
But how do you allow for an increase in trade while protecting the region with the highest biodiversity in the world? It's impossible to look at the connection between transport and trade in Latin America without first taking note of its geography. This is a region that spans from Mexico to Patagonia, and in between there you find the Amazon, the largest tropical forest in the world. The Andes Mountains, the world's longest mountain range, wall off one half of the continent from the other.
So that all means that building infrastructure is difficult and it's expensive.
Will Freeman is a fellow for Latin America Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.
I mean, you look at a country like Peru, where you have a thin strip of coastal land and then they're just mountain ranges for most of the rest of the country until you get to the Amazon. Ecuador, Colombia, a number of countries have geography like that. So it's a lot more difficult than, say, building a road in France or in Germany.
This map shows the percentage of the rural population living within 2 kilometres of an all-weather road. The pink areas are the least connected. Orange a little bit better, yellow better again, and the light blue and dark blue are the best connected areas. We've no information for some countries. Protected areas, here in white, often coincide with regions with limited road connectivity.
En primer lugar, como muchos saben, es la región más biodiversa del mundo.
That's Paula Caballero, Executive Director of the Latin America region of the Nature Conservancy.
Alberga el 40% de las especies y el 25% de los bosques. Una de cada 3 gotas de agua en el planeta están en América Latina, o sea, 1/3 del agua dulce.
This makes the continent mega diverse when it comes to its ecology. It's got really impressive ecosystems like the Pantanal, one of the most important wetlands in the world. While the forests surrounding the Andes have habitats like the Páramos that support agriculture. The region's climate and geography also influence its assets. Like oil and soybeans and copper, Chile and Peru are top global producers of the mineral, used in things like renewable technologies. Then there's coffee, a lot of it, and not forgetting lithium, the mineral of the moment. Argentina, Chile and Bolivia, known as the Lithium Triangle, hold over 50% of global lithium reserves, making the region really important in the global energy transition, as the mineral is used to help power EVs and store renewable energy. But how do traders and businesses move their goods around? Railways are largely underdeveloped, and while roads are the primary means of transport, only 23% of them are paved.
It's clear that the region invests less in infrastructure than other emerging economies.
Elijah Oliveros Rosen is the chief economist for emerging markets at S&P Global Ratings.
The amount varies, but if we average the total infrastructure investment for the region, it is roughly 3%. Now, if you narrow it down to just transport infrastructure, that's around 1%. So it's really small.
This lack of investment has ripple effects across the whole economy because investing in infrastructure tends to have a multiplier effect on growth. You invest $1 and you get more than $1 back in the long run because you've facilitated increased trade. But the opposite is happening in Latin America. According to a study from the World Bank, all Latin American countries face logistics costs that are much higher than those in the OECD and the US. The benchmark for logistics costs is around 10%. In Latin America, they range from 15 to 25%. And though research is sparse on the topic, a study from 2008 looking at moving soybeans by truck for export from north of the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso to the port of Paranaguá could cost around $79 per tonne. This compares to $34 per tonne when moving by truck and barge soybeans produced around Minneapolis in the US, along the Mississippi River to the Gulf ports in the country. Brazil, according to one study, is actually estimated to spend an extra almost 30% moving goods because of problems with the conditions of its roads. The picture is further complicated when looking at some ports in the region, with the lack of access roads being a particular problem. And while they have gotten better, with the numbers on the left representing their rating, they lag behind their peers in other regions of the world. Panama in Central America, with the Caribbean Sea on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other, is a connectivity outlier in the region because of its canal. 5% of all seaborne trade in the world passes through this canal each year, with access to both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, without the lengthy trip around South America. But whether Panama can continue to be a major player is questionable. Higher global temperatures are especially relevant to the region. Natural disasters have become more frequent and destructive, making the region the second most disaster-prone across the world. In 2023, for example, the Panama Canal was hit by a severe drought. Authorities dropped the number of crossings and there were record delays. This had a huge impact on supply chains. It forced liquid natural gas exporters from the US to circumnavigate the southern tip of South America, adding days of transit time. And that's one of the reasons why Panama is at the center of trade tensions between the US and China.
China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
You can sort of almost precisely divide the continent in two. Below Panama, it's essentially China being the main trading partner, and above Panama, it's the US. So if you look at Mexico, for example, Mexico exports around almost 30% of their GDP to the US. But then if you look at Chile, Peru, they export around 10% to China, but only a couple percentage points to the US.
This is how the two powers have played out in the region over a 20-year period, from 2000 to 2021. For some countries, we've no information. But you see that within just 2 decades, China is now a major trading partner of South American countries.
That relationship is primarily trade-driven and diplomatic. China has turned to Latin America as a place to secure raw materials, metals, and agricultural goods, to feed a growing population, to supply its own turn towards renewable energy and new types of manufacturing. And it's also looked for diplomatic support. And more specifically, it's looked to isolate Taiwan. It's also China's looking to compete with the United States in its own neighborhood. At the same time that the US tries to leverage influence in Asia Pacific, China is trying to turn around and do essentially the same thing, remind the United States that it's not invulnerable in its own house.
And apart from trade, with many of the region's governments operating under significant fiscal constraints, China is among the top sources of foreign direct investment in Latin America. Between 2005 and 2022, it invested in 228 infrastructure projects. 77 related to energy, 13 were for telecommunications, and 90 of these were transport projects.
This is a striking statistic. China invests more in Latin America infrastructure than the combined amount of development banks. It's the largest single external investment source for infrastructure, especially when it comes to ports and railways. So there's clearly a lot of interest in China in securing access to key resources of the region and in building economic relationship with the region so they have access to these resources.
Many of these projects arrive under the banner of China's Belt and Road Initiative, its global infrastructure development strategy to increase trade. For example, it's just built a megaport in Chancay in Peru, cutting down on transport times between South America and Shanghai.
It's really going to become a conveyor belt of South American minerals and agricultural goods from Brazil, from Argentina, from Chile, from Peru, from Ecuador, across the Pacific. There's a self-interested reason that China is investing in this infrastructure. It wants to streamline those flows of commodities out of the region and into its own markets.
But given all that we know about biodiversity in the region, is it possible to preserve it while allowing for development and economic growth?
Nuestros bosques, nuestros manglares, nuestros páramos, nuestros humedales albergan tal cantidad de carbono que nosotros sí somos un agente muy importante de mantener esa estabilidad climática del planeta.
Here you see areas across the world that hold the most carbon. The lighter in colour the region, the less carbon it soaks, while the darker areas absorb the most CO2.
Porque la buena noticia es que esa idea de que es o lo uno o lo otro, que tiene que haber o crecimiento o medio ambiente, es completamente errado. Lo que vemos es que no puede haber crecimiento si no protegemos esos cimientos, esos fundamentos ambientales para que tengamos garantías de un clima estable, de suelos fértiles, de provisión de agua, etcétera, etcétera.
But a study looking at deforestation around the Amazon found that roads in the region can be linked to the clearance of trees. Satellite images show the BR-163 highway in the Brazilian state of Pará in 1990. Then it was a narrow, unpaved road. Fast forward to 2019. Significantly deforested land here in orange leads off the road, then mostly paved and in some stretches with 2 lanes.
Hay una cifra que yo quiero que los quienes escuchen esta transmisión tengan muy presente. El 95% de la deforestación en el Amazonas, y esto es una cifra que se mantiene a nivel global,
experts argue that the biggest concerns in the region come from within. Concerns related to the expansion of illegal economies like illegal gold mining or timber or drug trafficking, whose businesses have really grown.
They exploit this very same infrastructure, and in some ways their supply chains are more regionally integrated than those of legal businesses. So you look at the Amazon right now, you've had an expansion of cocaine trafficking and coca growing there, a huge expansion of illegal gold mining as prices for gold surge and only seem to be going up more and more as we have this increasing uncertainty over the future of the global trading system. So I do worry that those actors who aren't constrained by the law, they're going to be the ones who are doing most to destroy the environment in Latin America. And government's having a very hard time reining them in.
According to a report from Insight Crime, illegal economies are placing the region's biodiversity under significant threat. And the region is the most violent in the world for those who defend the land and the environment. The figures on the left show the number of environment-related killings across the world. In blue, you see other regions of the world, while the pink represents Latin America, which in 2023 recorded 85% of all murders of environment defenders. It's not straightforward when looking at whether Latin America can preserve its biodiversity while strengthening trade and transport capacities. There hasn't been enough spending on infrastructure to truly know. And with the little spending we've seen, the region is already experiencing problems. I was surprised when researching this story that governments in Latin America haven't managed to deliver a broad multi-year transport infrastructure strategy, especially given that logistics costs are so high and their economies are on the line. And while there are hurdles from the region's geography to the rise in illegal economies, the biggest hurdle to me seems to be the lack of a vision and the money to back it up.